finally get what I deserve.
Skeleton Soldier Couldn't Protect the Dungeon is a webtoon, or basically, a Korean webcomic drawn chapter by chapter in one long strip designed for vertical scrolling. Skeleton Soldier Couldn't Protect the Dungeon's story follows a skeleton who happily served a succubus until she was killed in front of him. The skeleton soldier was also then killed, but for some reason, he wakes up, alive, 20 years before he was killed. Distraught at the loss of his beloved, mistress, the nameless skeleton soldier resolves to save her in the future. This resolve becomes more plausible when the skeleton soldier realizes that every time he dies, he gets a do-over, and he's able to get stronger and obtain more abilities than he ever would have as a standard skeleton soldier guarding a dungeon. As a reader, you slowly realize that the skeleton soldier seems to be an NPC in some kind of fantasy game. Not just a skeleton in a standard fantasy universe, but specifically an enemy NPC in a JRPG-style fantasy. And for some reason, he's been gifted the ability to respawn, to level up, to pursue quests, and to see the statuses of other characters. He uses these abilities pragmatically, but is completely baffled by them. The skeleton soldier has no idea where these abilities come from. I mean, he presumably has no idea what a video game even is. And step by step, he learns how to use his new abilities to his advantage. There's a genre of manga and anime called isekai, revolving around a normal person being transported to or trapped in a parallel universe. The subgenre can be characterized as wish fulfillment, with the person being transported often being a NEET, shut-in, or gamer. In the new fantasy world, they are able to succeed through use of their comparatively unimportant in real-life genre knowledge, or gaming skills, through the use of a game interface only they can access. I'm far from an isekai expert. I'm sure there are works in this genre that are great, and some that are fun and subversive. I have friends whose opinions I respect who really enjoy some of them, so I'm not saying the genre is trash or insulting people who enjoy it, but even as a teenager, I really didn't have any interest in wish fulfillment fiction, especially fiction very deliberately catering to a certain kind of male nerd. Sweet Home, my favorite webtoon, which I also reviewed, centers around a suicidal Korean equivalent of a 4chan NEET, but it's a dark comedy horror series, where he's slowly learning bravery and empathy and how to be a good person. And while he's terrified and fighting for his life, his change is genuinely moving. And it's the opposite of a wish fulfillment fantasy series about how special and unique a nerd secretly was all along, because he was a gamer. Skeleton Soldier Couldn't Protect the Dungeon has all the fun meta elements of isekai material, without the, to me, cringy pandering. Skeleton Soldier is not a human nerd, whose gaming ability suddenly made him a capable hero in a fantasy world. He is literally a skeleton. Many of the times I laughed at the comic involved the fact that his character design is a realistically rendered skeleton that is navigating a fantasy world of stylized, expressive humans and monsters. And the, I think, intentional absurdity of his realistic skeleton appearance in juxtaposition with those humans. And he loved his succubus boss and was happy to serve her, and that's it. He has no desire to change the world or be a hero. And apart from him slowly growing stronger and being recognized for his strength, he is not a hero or a chosen one. He wears armor to disguise himself because he wants to stay under the radar and one day save someone he cares about. He actually has information on the political landscape of the future that could change the course of history, but he doesn't seem to care about that outside of his one goal. Additionally, because he is a skeleton, he seems to have no sexual or romantic interest in anyone. His relationship to the succubus seems platonic. So the story isn't inundated with the horny teenage boys surrounded by big-boobed fantasy women trope. The only trope that I hate in this comic, and it's my big hesitation when recommending it to pretty much anyone, is that it's extremely rapey and uses violence towards women as a plot device way too often, especially in the first several chapters. The cliched fantasy, look at how dark and evil this world is. You can tell that the world is dark and scary and evil because there's so much rape. Skeleton Soldier himself seems essentially asexual, and he isn't misogynistic or sadistic or anything like that. But there are a lot of women he meets who get raped or raped and murdered, to the extent that I stopped wanting to get attached to any of the female characters that he runs into. I'm not opposed to sexual violence in fiction, but it's a serious and heavy topic that deserves respect and time devoted to fully explore its ramifications. In my Hannibal video, I quoted a great Brian Fuller interview on the subject that I'll link in the description here, and it feels completely inappropriate as a repeated plot device in a fantasy RPG skeleton comic. And I mean so repeated and yet so so out of place to the point that it felt absurd. It's extremely off-putting. And it isn't a comic that otherwise objectifies women or poorly represents them. I particularly like Skeleton Soldier's female thief companion, who is a fun, fleshed-out character comparable to Nami in One Piece. She's underhanded and ruthless in a way that is realistic and intriguing, rather than a femme fatale stock character or some kind of weird, gross implication that women are untrustworthy. And most female characters are interesting and treated by the narrative as people, and there aren't overlong, cringy fan service scenes or rape scenes meant to excite readers. A lot of it is off-screen and heavily implied and that kind of thing, but there's so much rape. I would absolutely prefer lighthearted fan service to so much rape. That feels less exploitative to me than weird, heavily censored rape scenes that are still there. Skeleton Soldier's story has elements of political subterfuge and explorations of monster-human relations, but this isn't a serious adult webcomic that makes room for content really exploring the ramifications of sexual violence in its universe. Man Bites Dog, for example, is one of my favorite movies, and it has repeated instances of brutal sexual violence, but it's a subversive and confrontational film about consumption of media violence, not a goofy fantasy action series about a walking skeleton. When I was rereading parts of the story for this video, I did catch an at times explicit thematic undercurrent, where Skeleton Soldier relates to women, or women to him, being seen as just a body, being seen as incapable, being seen as an other. That is worth mentioning, and most of the rape happens towards the beginning of the comic, and the comic does seem to get a little bit better about it as it progresses, but it remains off-putting and baffling to me, especially because Sweet Home is forefront in my mind while reading other webtoons, and sexual violence, if explored there, would be handled with more nuance and gravity, rather than a sledgehammer reminder that people in this world are bad. They're really mean. You know that they're mean because they rape women. Skeleton Soldier Couldn't Protect the Dungeon reminds me a little bit of Mog World, Yahtzee's novel about a character in an MMO, which I enjoyed a lot when I read it almost a decade ago. But Skeleton Soldier is less satirical and less meta, and at times seems self-aware and plays with cliches, and other times is kind of dumb and banks too hard on them. Like when you see another soldier who refuses to take his helmet off, the mysterious knight who refuses, like, I wonder, could it be a woman in disguise? I've never ever seen that, I've never heard of that before. Genius plot twist. Other times, the way the narrative works is neat. Since Skeleton Soldier is an enemy NPC and not some kind of hero, he has what's called an assimilation rate, and he has to be careful with how much time he spends in dungeons and completing quests and clearing out monsters. As a JRPG fan generally, it's fun to try to figure out what tropes he'll run into, what abilities and quests he'll get, and what monsters he'll either befriend or fight. Along with Skeleton Soldier's human thief companion, I also really like a character who is a shapeshifting slime. The art shines particularly during fight scenes, which are rendered fluidly and gorgeously, and when Skeleton Soldier is expressing a certain emotion, which the artist manages to pull off while usually keeping his rendering realistic, aided by great, often subtle, use of body language. This comic also has one of my favorite titles out of anything that I've ever read. It's kind of silly and weird, but it's also a reminder to the reader of the main character's regret, and of the failure he's always trying to make up for. He really loved the succubus who took care of him, and her death was genuinely traumatic for him. There's no official English translation of this comic, and I think the app that you would use to read the Korean version isn't even available in the US. But I'm sure viewers could easily find fan translations if they look for them, though watch out for weird, shady scanlation sites. I would like for more people to read this, and would readily give money to support the author or support an English translation, though this series is, like I said, a somewhat hesitant recommendation from me, because the weird, absurd, and darkly funny skeleton action is, especially in the first chapters, overshadowed by pervasive sexual violence. Still, I enjoy it a lot, and it's one of only 3 comics that I keep up with, and its unpretentious and unpandering approach to a meta video game story is always engaging to me, and I'm excited to see where it goes, especially what will happen with certain recurring characters, whether or not we'll get a full explanation for Skeleton Soldier's powers. I'd be satisfied either way, and if and how Skeleton Soldier will, one day, protect the dungeon. Thank you for watching. If I missed anything about JRPG lore or the way the story works, feel free to point that out in the comments. I've played a lot of JRPGs, but not always a lot of the mainstream series, and I don't know anything about current isekai shows or comics, so maybe there are more references to that that totally went over my head, because they would go over my head because I've never enjoyed this genre when I've tried it, or it doesn't seem like something I would really like. I prefer a One Piece style thing where it's just a really fun adventure with a fun cast of characters, rather than here's a specific character that you would be if you went to this universe, because like, why would I want to be a nerd guy transported into a universe when I could just be a part of the universe? If you would like to support me, I have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, and along with other video essays and reviews, I'm also on a podcast called Critical Bits. It's an actual play podcast, a teen superhero podcast, not a fantasy podcast, and we just put out the 6th episode. As it's gone along, it's gone from just sort of a dumb, fun, slapstick comedy teen superhero podcast to more of like a dark comedy body horror podcast that still has slapstick elements. I'm really proud of how it's going, and if that's something that you would enjoy, as with a bunch of things in this video, link in the description, and thanks.
Well, guy in a skeleton costume comes up to the guy in the Superman suit, runs through him with a broadsword.